Thank you very much for joining my call. My name is Jeanette Prannen-Corin, and today I will be talking about how my company Fabric releases for our micro front ends using Unleash as our feature flag provider. Today we'll cover just a quick introduction about myself, what micro front ends are, our micro front end setup, why we decided to use feature flags for our setup, why we specifically used Unleash as our feature flag provider, as well as what value that Unleash provides for us. So just a little bit about myself. Again, as I mentioned earlier, my name is Jeanette Prannen-Corin. I am a senior software engineer at Fabric, which is an e-commerce SaaS platform. I am a full stack developer. I have been for a couple years now, and I am based in beautiful New York City. So in case you're curious, what are micro front ends exactly? It's possible that you have heard of microservices before, but micro front ends, what is that? Basically, micro front ends are an architecture style that's similar to microservices. It splits an actual web application into smaller independent features. So that means that you can have a complete page, but you can also have fragments of a page that are independently controlled by micro front ends. So what's really great about that is that you can have independent ownership and deployment. So with micro front end architecture, there are responsibilities of a greater monolithic application that are separated to be different sub-applications. In this way, these can be implemented by different teams that are global, that work in different time zones, that work in different offices, and they can all implement these functions concurrently, as opposed to having to depend on each other. They can also be deployed independently. So if one sub-application's features are ready, we don't need to wait for the entire platform to be ready in order to work on those. We can also adopt different technology stacks. So say that you have one team that is really great at React and really loves React Redux as a state management tool. You can have one application do that. Perhaps another team really enjoys Vue or Angular. You can also use that. So really any JavaScript framework is on the table here. It really helps that these are autonomous pieces of software, and it can really highlight each team's strength in that way. It's also pretty reliable. If any one of these micro front ends or modules fails, the others will continue to function. Now, this is really important when we have a really large application that does a lot of things at once. We want to make sure that we want to minimize the blast radius of any bugs, any unexpected behavior to as minimal as possible. This also results in higher performance. In a monolithic application, the entire application must always be uploaded or loaded, I should say. So even if not all parts or pages are being used in a session, it's going to make the initial load time pretty high. With micro front-end architecture, you can take a specific module of the application and load it on demand, as opposed to loading it in the very beginning. So it reduces a lot of load time, it reduces deployment time, all that good stuff. Reusability, you can also reuse a lot of functions. Micro front ends are really great at developing several applications with common workflow requirements. For example, if you all have a similar authorization layer or a functionality, we can abstract those out into its own utility and have it basically be specifically shared across all of these micro front ends. So for example, if you are always passing in the same headers to your APIs, if you have a common configuration for your Fetch API or Axios API, whatever you would like, you can abstract those out so that they're reused across all of your micro front ends. So we will go over our specific micro front end setup for Fabric. So we specifically use the single SPA framework. What's really cool about it is that it can apply a life cycle to every micro front end application. So when I say life cycle, I mean the loading time, the bootstrapping time, the mounting, the unmounting, and the unloading. So single SPA provides hooks into each of these phases, which is really helpful for us to know exactly when to bootstrap or load something, depending on perhaps a URL or perhaps a query parameter change. All of that is supported with single SPA. And we do have a React with TypeScript tech stack. So basically our setup at a very high level, we have an authentication login flow, which is its own micro front end application. We have a navigation that is its own micro front end. And we have the main content, which depending on the URL, will cycle through for every micro front end for per product. So for example, Fabric, which is an e-commerce SaaS company, we have a product information management system, we have an order management system, we have an offers and promotion management system. Each of these domains, as we call them, have their own micro front end. So basically you can see this is our dashboard, our internal dashboard that our customers can use to look at all of these things. And you can see how this is actually broken up. So this header micro front end that has my profile and whatever additional features that we have is all controlled by one micro front end. This left navigation is controlled by one micro front end, and this main content is the one that actually changes and switches out depending on which URL we're at. So on the home page, we have the home page micro front end. When we click on product catalog, we have a product catalog micro front end, et cetera, et cetera. So with that overview in mind, why do we want to use feature flags to actually release features? So one thing that's really important to us, although we are an e-commerce SaaS platform, we really invest heavily in our engineering teams and in our technology stacks. We want to make sure that we're practicing the best practices that are available to the developer community. So trunk-based development is really important to us. In case you don't know what that is, trunk-based development is a practice where developers merge small, frequent updates to a core trunk branch. That's usually called main. Previously, back when software development first existed, when there was no sort of version control, there were many branches of a repository that had to be maintained concurrently, and that cost a lot of money, that took a lot of developer time. So basically we wanted to get away from that and always being able to merge our code into our main branch without having to worry about this maintenance. So there's continuous integration. So even as we are adding features, perhaps they're not ready yet, we still want that code to be available in our trunk. We wanted to have safe and flexible deployment. So we want to push these changes behind a feature flag so that only intended users see those new features while the rest of the code is live and integrated. This allows for a controlled rollout. We can utilize an incremental release strategy. So in the very beginning, we only allow our internal teams and QA teams to see the feature behind the feature flag. Then we can do a per customer release. So if anyone signs up for a beta rollout, they can actually sign up for that and have the ability to test these features internally and send us feedback while it's in a beta phase. We can also have a percentage release where we gradually increase exposure by first releasing to a small percentage of users. So in case any perhaps bugs or unintended behavior comes out that we didn't realize before, we can again minimize that blast radius and only affect a handful of customers as opposed to all of our customers. And then finally, once all is said and done, once everything has been validated and looks great, we can release to the general public. This allows for really efficient roll forward and rollback. We don't have to click on a pipeline deployment and wait 5 minutes for that job to run. We can very quickly just click a toggle and the feature is immediately available or immediately unavailable. There's no downtime. So some examples that we have personally used for feature flag rollouts are a design system. If you are familiar with front-end development, you definitely know that design systems are very important. And we recently had a really big effort, which I'll talk about later in more detail, but we had a really big effort of going from a design system that was a little bit more disjointed to a design system that was researched for 2 years, that we had discussions with our customers, as well as basically we interviewed our customers and wanted to see where they wanted to have these design updates. Another thing is new backend system URL changes. So as our company changes and evolves, our API contracts change, perhaps we increment our patch versions to minor and even major versions. We want to make sure that all of the behavior from the front end is not impacted by those backend changes. So now you understand why we picked feature flags as our strategy of rolling things out, but there are a bunch of companies that offer these sort of this product. Why did we decide to choose Unleash? So it's actually a bit of a funny story. We initially started with GitLab. GitLab is the repository product that we use here at Fabric, and included in our plan was GitLab feature flags, which was really cool. However, unfortunately, we did have a little bit of an incident in February of 2022. So we hit the feature flag limit of 500 requests per minute, which maybe upon first glance sounds like, oh, that's crazy. But when you think about each domain having their own micro front end, they're all testing out their own features, as well as the general dashboard application also is testing out its own features. We hit that limit pretty quickly. It introduced high latency because our requests were throttled, and we actually did unfortunately see a max peak of 12 seconds loading time for some of our customers, which is a big no-go. This incident did occur relatively quick after we rolled out with GitLab feature flags. So this happened about 1 to 2 months into that system being in production. So I'll show you what that looked like on here on our dashboard for our metrics. You can see how at 6 in the morning, all was great, all was dandy. And the moment that we hit those throttling limits, we had a huge amount of latency, and it impacted basically every single domain. So why Unleash? GitLab's feature toggles feature does offer an Unleash compatible API. So it was a very natural choice. Basically, there are no throttling limits. I did double check on this. There are throttling limits, but nowhere close to the 500 requests per minute limit that we had encountered with GitLab. So for all intents and purposes, there were no throttling limits that we had to worry about. This Unleash is so fast. It is nanoseconds, which is really unheard of. Our client, or Unleash's client SDK, caches all of their feature toggles in memory. So it's very, very fast. The SDK also supports multiple languages. Our tech stacks are primarily Java, Node, and Python, which is really important because we wanted to make sure that whatever product we used did have that support, as well as it allows us to create custom strategies. So for example, we wanted to be able to segment which customers got access to what features. Some customers do want to be in our beta rollout group, and so we can have a beta rollout group defined on Unleash. We also have a user ID strategy that we use. So if a user is part of this user ID, perhaps it's the user ID of the team's QA focal, then we can actually constrain on those custom attributes that we define. And that's for team-specific internal accounts. So as promised, I will go ahead and talk about what rolling out our new design system looks like. So it was a pretty big process. First, we wanted to, it was called Design System 4.0 or DS4 for short. We set up the Unleash proxy and made sure to deploy it into our cloud. We had to set up an API access key that all of our micro front ends had access to so that they could see, so that Unleash could see which feature flags were available to our micro front ends. We had one feature flag per micro front end related to our Design System 4.0. And then we also had one feature flag for the entire feature. So as you can see here, this is what our Design System 3 looks like. It looked great, but we knew that there were a bunch of features that we wanted to enable to our customers that unfortunately this design could not support in scale. So we moved over to this beautiful new system on the right-hand side. As you can imagine, these micro front ends each had their own DS4 feature toggle. So we could actually look in real time if I wanted to see what this left navigation used to look like in DS3, I could just turn that off and it would actually render this header. Same thing with this main content. If we wanted to see what DS4 looked like, we could turn this feature flag on and it would show up as just this. Otherwise, if you turned it off, you could see just this section. So it was actually really cool to see piecemeal how all of these, how each page and each component of the page was coming together like a puzzle piece as we were rolling out DS 4.0. So it began in December of 2022, so a really long time ago. It officially rolled out in August 2023, and again, this design system underwent several years of exploration. Big shout out to our UX team for doing that. But it began in December 2022, and it began meaning actual feature development work began in December 2022, and the entire feature rolled out in August 2023. So that's a relatively quick turnaround, about 8 months. Hundreds, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it were thousands of MRs across teams were merged into production behind these feature flags very safely. And it was validated by our design QA, our functional QA at every single step. Our production release cadence was fortunately not affected. We still, obviously we have code freezes like every company, but in general, we like to release to production relatively frequently. So it didn't affect that, which was great. Turning on the feature could be done in seconds. As I mentioned earlier, Unleash is lightning fast. If we wanted to turn it on and immediately saw an issue that we didn't foresee, we could roll back immediately. So we followed the release strategy of first we did internal release to just our QA teams to make sure that all of the functionality and all the visuals looked as expected. Then we did a beta release of select customers who opted into having this new design system. And as we continued getting that feedback, we were able to incorporate it without, again, using trunk-based development, not affecting our production release cadence. And then finally, in August of 2023, we did have a general release. In addition to that, throughout December 22 to August of 2023, we did have ongoing support for our previous design system alongside the new design system development. So again, we still wanted to make sure that our customers had the most up-to-date features that our backends were providing. So we still wanted to make sure that those customers who are not in our beta rollout, who were still wanting to be on our older design system, would still have the advantage of seeing all of the features that our backend teams were working really hard to support. And if you want to hear more or learn more, you're more than welcome to go to our blog release. It's really exciting. It goes through, again, the actual design research process as well as the rollout process and all that good stuff. So in summary, we really do heavily rely on feature flagging to safely deploy and release new features. It is something that is very important to us, again, to follow these development best practices in order to make sure that we are a technology first company. Unleash thankfully does support that. The Unleash team is so responsive. It's really great anytime we've had any sort of issue, which is frankly not too many issues have come up. But in the 2 years that we've been working with them, they're a very gracious team. And I've actually had the opportunity to meet a couple of them in New York last year and talk to them, and it was really great. And so now I am happy to report that we can confidently be badass developers who release on Fridays. Shout out to Unleash if you want to get this shirt. It's available on their store. So thank you so much. Again, my name is Jeanette Prannen-Corin. I am available on LinkedIn. If you ever want to chat about micro front ends, feature flagging, Unleash, any of that good stuff, send me a message. Thank you again.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jeanette. That was fantastic. It's amazing to hear about your micro front-end strategy, how you approach it all, and it was insightful. I heard you there you are. So
yes. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one remark, because you mentioned one thing that I found that I was sitting here laughing by myself. You mentioned that we now don't have to wait for 5 minutes for the build to complete and deploy onto servers. And like for most people, 5 minutes is like, that's quite fast. So it's luckily feature flags are faster, but it's just amazing.
Yeah, for sure. We are very impatient here at Fabric. We need to push everything out right away.
Yeah, I imagine. So you mentioned this big use case of changing the design system, and I found it quite fascinating case study, and it was quite a lengthy process. It's kind of a long running feature, I would say.
Yes.
But one question I have about that: so how did you specifically use feature flags? Did you use like one flag for the entire process, or did you have individual flags per kind of team or kind of component or whatever you would call that?
Yeah, exactly. So basically we initially had multiple feature flags. So as each domain or, each product was working on their own timelines, on their own quarterly plan, we didn't want them to have to depend on a central feature flag, because some teams were able to get to the work faster than other teams. So we had these individual feature flags, and then at the end, we sort of aggregated it all into one feature flag. So that is the approach that we used.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. You also mentioned that you use a combination of custom strategies, and you're segmenting some customer groups and all of that. Can you go in a bit more depth? So outside of the kind of simple use case of enabling it for yourself and your team, kind of what type of segmentation do you do when you target more your end users?
Yeah, sure. So at least for us, I wouldn't say it's necessarily for our end users. It's more who gets to see it. So the first sort of segment, quote unquote, was really just individual accounts. So like, this is my internal team's internal test account. Let's only enable it there.
Yeah.
Then we decided, okay, now the QA teams will be able to look at it, so the QA segment can see it. Then if certain customers wanted to see this in beta mode, they could. So we had a segment for that, those beta customers. And then finally, we did the percentage rollout release. So we didn't necessarily do it on segment in terms of like, this type of company gets it first versus a different company, but that was the rollout that we did.
Cool. You also mentioned your journey kind of transition from GitLab onto Unleash. Can you elaborate a bit more on some of the benefits and maybe also the challenges of that transition to make that a success?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, GitLab does utilize Unleash on the back end of things. So thankfully, we didn't have to change too much. It actually was a relatively quick transition, especially for how many teams did have to transition. I think, don't quote me on it, but I think it really took about a month for all of our domain teams to migrate over. It obviously was a big thing, right? Because 500
Yeah,
requests
yeah.
per minute really isn't that much when you're
No.
talking about e-commerce systems. So I, for some reason, sometimes I think that GitLab should have a higher throttle limit for enterprise customers, but I digress. Unleash, I checked with our account rep, Michael, and he said, basically, you guys don't have feature toggles, obviously within reason, but, or sorry, feature
Yeah,
throttling limits is what I mean. Of course, you have feature toggles.
yeah, of course. So obviously we do have some DDoS protection and all of that, and
Yeah.
we do have limits just because you have to. You cannot scale
Yes.
from a very low baseline to unlimited kind of in just a second. So there needs to be some grace periods and stuff in order to just make a robust platform, basically.
Of course.
We also actually have a different question. So back to the design system. Sorry for jumping, but the questions are actually coming in live here. So there is a question around, did you also had an A/B testing on this new design system with actual customers?
So that was more handled during the UXR research phase. So before the development started, we were asking customers, hey, what are the challenges that you're discovering here? So that was, again, explored prior to development. But we could have
also,
testing.
you could probably done some maybe. I'm also, but actually an interesting thing when you do this type of change, which is that it kind of impacts everything, I would assume. So so when you transition a user, when you decide this user group, they actually get a new version.
Yes.
It's hard to go back because it's kind of a big shift in the UI, I would suspect.
Totally. But thankfully, our new UI was what's so tangibly better because there were a lot of limitations. So we had very little resistance, but I do understand the sort of spirit of your question of, it's just such a different user experience that it's a bit too hard. I find that A/B testing is a little bit easier for, not as huge of scale changes. But yeah, there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah, absolutely. The important thing is at least that you did the research, you did collect feedback on the new design. So I think kind of the important stuff is to collect feedback. A/B testing is obviously one way to collect feedback, but there are multiple other ways to achieve the same goal, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
Super cool. Thank you so much again, Jeanette. I think that's the end of it. I don't have more questions. So thank you so much for taking the time and showing up to the Q&A.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate it.